breath, psychedelics, body work, meditation, and people's obsession or interest in, let's say, aliens. When I think about technology and what comes up is it's always a tool that we want to use, but not that we want to be used by. It's fun to riff when you're such a great listener. The questions you're asking are so phenomenal. So it's so fun to be able to move within that space.
Yeah. Appreciate your being here. You are would you consider yourself either a celebrity or an upcoming celebrity? Do you even put yourself in the category? Like, is that a different type of people or,
That's a good question. So a friend of mine who, we've talked about this, right? Being famous versus being known. I would say I'm a well-known figure
Mm-hmm.
in the psychedelic space
Mm-hmm.
in particular. And that the psychedelic space, the industry, the community, whatever it is really emerging as a potent force for change right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've often wrestled with, celebrity or non-celebrity. I really prefer the non-celebrity route. I feel like the celebrity thing is a little TV, movie,
Exactly.
superficial.
Right.
And there's a lot more downside than upside to being famous.
Sure.
And if that's the natural path that I continue to emerge on, great. But I care a lot more about impact and teaching and philosophy than I do about fame or, being so widely known
Fair.
that it's ridiculous.
Yeah. That's why the question just emerged. I never really thought too much about that, but I'd love for you to share your journey of becoming who you are today, some of the instrumental milestones that brought you here,
Yeah, the origin story.
I guess you could say that. Yeah, exactly. Isn't that exactly that?
It's exactly that, right? Like, how did I'm taking this mentorship program at the moment, and part of our assignment, part of what we're doing through that is telling our story, right? Self-authoring our narrative. And that's important to understand both what's happened to you and why it's brought you to where you are now. So mine is the thing that I root in is family. So I grew up in West Michigan in a very, traditional family, religious family. My parents are still together. I have two sisters. They all live in Michigan still within 20 minutes of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very sort of salt of the earth, close to the ground community where a lot of the morality, a lot of the values are rooted in Christianity. So I grew up in that dynamic and that environment.
Yeah.
And it was really helpful because I grew up in some ways very sheltered, minimal levels of trauma. I had, I played the violin, I played college soccer. I was, excelled in terms of academics. So I really came from a very privileged background in many ways, right? And within that story, though, growing up, I always felt a little bit like the black sheep or the oddball, like I thought lived in a more unconventional way. So by the time I was 16, I got into cannabis and started smoking cannabis, which my parents weren't a huge fan of at the very least. And then by the age of 19, I was starting to work with psychedelics in a fairly intentional way. And again, I spent all this time in West Michigan, growing up there. But psychedelics really helped me to realize that the problem wasn't with me so much, because when you grow up in a fairly traditional religious framework, there's a lot of shame and guilt around the person that you're becoming. And you never feel like you can really fully express or be fully expressed because there's a lot of, you can't do this, or you can't say this, or you can't be this. There's a lot of can'ts. And the core motivating value that I have is freedom and self-expression through freedom, right? And so when I started to work with psychedelics in an intentional way, what those taught me was that the shame and the guilt that I had taken on growing up in that environment was not mine to take on, and that I could let it go and surrender it and just be done with it.
Sure.
And that in having that experience, those early psychedelic experiences, and these are at higher dose levels with LSD and psilocybin mushrooms, it gave me the courage to really pursue what would be a much more unconventional path, because the hallmark of any high dose psychedelic experience is ego dissolution, right? Ego death. And when the ego dies, you're not nearly as constricted in terms of what you think you can do, because the personality is tied to the ego, and the personality are all the shoulds that we grow up with. You should be this, you should do that, you should have these values. And when that dies and you let go of that, you're free to actually pursue what it is you really want to create. And so by the age of 19 and 20, I was having these thoughts and these perspectives. And so when I finished my undergrad in college, I moved abroad, lived in Turkey for a year where I taught English, moved to Thailand soon after that and started to build my first online business, and then continued to travel and live in different places. And that just then happened to put me in a place where by the age of 24, I was tracking what was going on in the psychedelic space and thought, hey, this is a really important movement. These are really important medicines. These are vastly misunderstood. There's not a lot of education on them. And I would love to really teach the wider public around, like, well, what are the actual pros and cons of psychedelics? How do we microdose if we want to microdose? How can these help with neurogenesis or overall well-being, or how can these help heal trauma? And I just started speaking from that because it was something that was really near and dear to my heart. And I was also balancing that with, my path as an entrepreneur. And I really sensed that this was going to be the next big thing for mental health care, or for leadership in business, or for general personal development and general awareness. And I thought, if I could do anything with my time and energy on this earth, in terms of creation or whatever, like, I'd really love to pursue a mission that aligns with amplifying the importance of psychedelics.
And then, was there like a very low point from which, was that the time where you felt like you're not being understood and you're kind of a, you know, different person you weren't? Was that, would you consider it as a low point from which you catapulted, or was there something else?
I would say, like, for most of my teenage years and early adolescence, I was never clinically depressed, but I always felt I had like anger. I had a lot of resentment. I was very guarded and shielded. I had, early peer stuff when I was like 9 or 10 that I felt very disconnected from my peer group at school and whatnot. And so a lot of what psychedelics help to do is just heal that disconnection and that sense of separation. And to give me the courage to pursue relationships that felt more aligned with who I was becoming. So there was not like I can't point to one specific low point, right? It was like I hit rock bottom here. There have been various throughout the years. There are various challenges or stress or relationships or whatever it might be. But I would say the underlying theme was I felt disconnected from my peer group. I felt, like,
From yourself too.
from myself as well. And that psychedelics helped me to come back home in many ways, to reconnect with that deeper sense of self, and with reconnecting to that deeper sense of self, helped me to open up to just whoever it was that was becoming.
And then, has that trajectory up, developing yourself, how bumpy has it been? Or has it been like a fairly smooth ride for you?
That's a great question. So I just came out of, maybe 6 months ago, of a fairly roller coastery, bumpy trip. I'm 31 now. And so I was just coming out of my Saturn return. And so the last few years have been, in some ways, very challenging and difficult, and in other ways, very inspiring and kind of showing me what's possible. When you combine any entrepreneur path, so any entrepreneur or freelancer or creative person can resonate with this, there's always ups and downs when you choose to pursue and chart your own path, because there's not a lot of models to go off of. So you're beholden to the uncertainty that life naturally presents. So certainly, like, a lot of challenges on any entrepreneurial path, right? Stress around money and finances, stress around team building, stress around product and service, stress around, and then that is only amplified being in the psychedelic space, right? Because up until the last maybe 18 months or 2 years, psychedelics were still highly stigmatized, not well accepted. There was no money or capital that was behind it. So pursuing a path as, let's say, a psychedelic pioneer, a psychedelic entrepreneur, you're really charting something that is totally not charted whatsoever.
Sure.
And so managing that uncertainty and having the courage to continue regardless of that uncertainty naturally comes with a lot of ups and downs. You know, I've been fortunate enough to speak at some incredible events, to have major media coverage in BBC, Rolling Stone, Forbes, to be on some incredible podcasts. And I've run out of money in my company before. I've had to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep it afloat. I've been very close to potential legal trouble because of being in the psychedelic space. I've had my entire team quit on me before. I had to rehire my whole team. So it's been a fucking roller coaster in many ways,
Yeah.
right? I've also had,
Uh,
you know, some not so great press. I've had some controversy being in the space. And what I found is as my own personal relationship with drama, let's say, changes, as I learn to settle into more of a flow
yeah.
and come to realize myself that things don't need to be dramatic or that I don't need to attach to suffering or
Mhm.
things being hard.
Mhm.
That felt like a lot of my story in my 20s that I was working through. And it was like a roller coaster in that way because it was exciting and there was dopamine and there was norepinephrine and there were all these rushes.
Yeah.
But with every uprush, naturally there comes a downrush,
Right.
right? And so what I've been learning through my 30s then in the past, let's say year to 18 months,
Mhm.
is just what's that place of equanimity? What's that place of balance, that
Mm.
place of being centered? And how do I root and anchor in that?
Yeah.
And then just
So you
follow
don't
that
go
path.
too high so you don't have to drop.
Yeah,
Right.
it's not like you're hitting the guardrails of your
Right.
experience. Instead, you're finding what's that smooth center point.
Right. Right.
And it's part of the sort of awareness work of anytime you go too far off that center point of awareness, what do you need to do to get back in that groove? You know, what is it meditation? Is it time off of work? Is
Sure.
it, you know, going to a retreat? Is it whatever it is?
Yeah.
But how do we continue to anchor around that place of equity? That's often what I come back to as a practice.
Mhm. So you're saying that even before you kind of were recognized for your work and more publicity poured on you, because I would imagine anyone that has that position would experience uh, the whole kind of spectrum of the types of people who are consuming your content, who are just around that topic. You will experience really good people, but that you will also experience people who have a lot of work to do type thing.
Well, especially in the psychedelic space, right? Because
Right.
psychedelics as a medicine are very attractive to those who have dealt with a lot of trauma, who have a lot of trauma,
Mhm.
who have tried many other practices or drugs or what have you, and they haven't worked. And psychedelics, they're coming to as maybe a last resort or as something that they're putting a lot of stock into. So a lot of that then, in terms of being in this space, has been discernment around boundaries, discernment around who you hire, discernment around who you bring into the fold, discernment around who you build and start businesses with. And in many ways, we learn that as we go, right?
Mhm.
I've had many relationships or partnerships, whatever it might have you, that I learned a lot from and were maybe toxic or difficult at the
Right.
time. And naturally, like the self can course correct and learns through that. And I would say at this point in time,
Mhm.
right, we're recording this November 2021.
Mhm.
There seems to be a sense of being with the right people. It was funny, you know, I had an astrology reading done maybe 6 or 7 months ago,
Mhm.
and by a phenomenal astrologer from Santa Cruz. And I've dabbled in astrology, but haven't really fully gotten into it.
Yeah.
And the astrology reading was essentially something along the lines of surrounding myself with really emotionally connected, open-hearted people, right? Because again, my tendency is to stay a little bit more guarded and shielded.
Mhm.
But yet when I find myself surrounded by really open-hearted, emotionally connected people, it's
Right.
much easier to be in that energy and be in that space. And yet the only way we can really do that is through trust, right? And surrender.
Mhm.
And so that's been really beautiful to see
Mhm.
the type of energy and community that started to grow around what we're doing, let's say at Third Wave,
Yeah.
right? And that's been both the team that we've hired. It's also, we've started to do training programs. We've started to train coaches to work with psychedelics, what I call the skill of psychedelic use. And I'd say if I could point to the one core reason, like deep core reason as to why I started Third Wave, many years ago in the first place, it was to find my people, find my tribe, find that community, right? And really cultivate that because that was, let's say, my core wound growing up was always feeling isolated or disconnected or sort of like the black sheep of my community. And so what I was really driven and motivated by was how can I create something to find those people? And so we started to develop training programs where we're training now coaches and how they can prepare clients for experiences, how they can help clients integrate psychedelic experiences, how they can help clients find, a great ayahuasca retreat or psilocybin retreat, how they might help them microdose. And that feels to me like so important because I love to teach and I love to train. And with where the larger psychedelic movement is going right now, what is central to the success of that is having trustworthy people who can hold phenomenal space for these experiences that people are going through. Because
Yeah.
healing trauma is not a clean and linear process. It's very messy. It's very weird. It's very difficult. There could be dark nights of the soul. So you really need to have a practitioner, a guide, a coach who can hold you through those moments of trial and tribulation, so to say. And what I find to be just as important is holding space for trauma is necessary. And as human beings, we have incredible potential to become something that we haven't been before, to step into greater power, awareness, a sense of greatness, and to have coaches who see that within us, who can hold us accountable to that, and then to work with tools like psychedelic medicine that help to create that awareness. It's a very potent combination because where we're at this point in time, I would say culturally or societally or systemically, is we sort of reached this tipping point or this ceiling on our evolutionary process. And my sense is the reason psychedelics are coming back around is to help us to break through that ceiling, to level up, so to say, to evolve to a new way of being, a new sense of consciousness. And what that consciousness has at its root is this truth of interconnectedness, right? Because what we learn from these high doses of psychedelics is everything is interconnected, right? Interdependencies are everywhere. And the more that we integrate that truth, that value into our way of being, the more we can create systems of harmony that are rooted in that sense of interconnection.
Wow, man. I love how you connected the initial question and then integrated it so seamlessly with, um,
It's fun to riff when you're such a great listener. The questions you're asking are so
um,
phenomenal. So it's so fun to be able to
yeah.
move within that space.
Yeah, yeah. I really admire people. That's probably because I resonate with the same level of like the ability to communicate because you basically, if you're able to communicate really well, you have a more manifestation power because the first um so we're bringing something from the spiritual ethereal domain into the physical domain through language. I it originated as a concept, as an idea, and if we wrap the language around it, because if we can't wrap our language around it, we can't manifest it in any way, right? We have to really comprehend it in some way, because so that's the bridge in a way to really uh, bring change into the physical world is your ability to like accurately describe your thoughts.
Articulation,
Yeah.
right, is right. And it's balancing the tension of the non-dual, right? Like this connection to source, God, the ineffable, the unfathomable, right? Which words cannot describe. Words can never touch that.
Mhm.
And how do we translate that experience of vastness or mystery into a tangible code,
Right.
if you will, right? Because then language is what helps to create the structure of our existence that we move within.
Hmm.
And if that language can be communicated in such a way that drops, that resonates,
Hmm.
that, gets here, but also, really gets to the heart, that's how we move people. That's how we
Hmm.
inspire people. That's how change happens.
Hmm.
And it feels like communication, right, is central to um, that philosophy or that way of doing it.
Yeah, for sure. A question around the guidance during psychedelic journeys or the psychedelic treatments for people. Terence McKenna mentions that it's not a g- it's not like a guide. It's more of a sitter. That they don't even know where you are. They can't really guide you in the space where you're at. They basically there to create a safe container for you in a way. Uh, but at the same time, I'm realizing, having a certain uh plan, creating some kind of a, a plan of action. I mean, it's probably part of that safe container, I guess. So I don't know, where does the guiding part comes in, maybe prior to the experience and not really. So tell me more about that. Yeah.
So in terms of guiding, let's say the actual psychedelic experience, it starts before and it continues long after, right? So what's central to any successful, productive, tangible experience with psychedelics is how we prepare for the experience. What is the set and setting of the actual experience itself? And then how are we integrating the insights, the week after, the month after, the year after, the decade after, whatever that time frame might be? How are we integrating those insights into who we show up
Hmm.
as on a day-to-day basis? And so when we're talking about the actual experience, right? The role of any guide, facilitator, therapist,
Mm.
anyone who's there present for that experience or sitter
Yeah.
is to hold space and be present,
Right.
right? There will be some guides who will be more actively involved, who may do some body work, who may help with, singing songs
Right.
or doing music, right? And there will be some guides that are just there to help you go to the bathroom or to get you tissue. But really, what every guide shares in common is they are a mirror
Hmm.
for the person who is going through the actual experience.
Hmm.
And so the more work that individual guides do,
Yeah.
let's say, the more clean and pure that they show up into that space,
Hmm.
the greater of a vessel they are for the transformation and healing of the client that they're working with. Because ultimately, the work that's done with psychedelics is very personal. It's very individual.
Yeah.
It's often, cathartic in rooting out trauma from the subconscious and the unconscious that needs to be processed in order to heal, right? Like psychedelics are being largely used at this point in time for clinical healing, for depression and addiction, for alcoholism, for PTSD. And a lot of those clinical conditions are rooted in what are called adverse childhood experiences. So those are things that have happened when we've been very young in childhood that were very difficult, that were very traumatic. And so what psychedelics do is they help to heal that and bring that up to the surface, right? And so when a guide is there and present,
Hmm.
they're what they're doing is they're mirroring back the intuitive healing intelligence that exists within each one of
Yeah.
us. Because all of us have literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary intelligence inside of us that has gotten us to this point in time, right? This present moment. And we're still alive. We're still grateful to be alive. And oftentimes for that healing path, we just need to be reminded of the divinity within us, right? And that's what psychedelics do. They open up that channel for connection to source, for something, connection to something greater.
Hmm.
They remind us that we are not just this personality that we've constructed, but we're something that is so much more vast and expansive than the tiny ego, right? We have this whole entire underlying self that exists within us. And so when a guide comes into a space, they're there to remind the client of that vastness within inside them, of that divinity that they have access to, because that connection is ultimately what is at the source of all of this healing.
Right.
It's that connection to something greater. And on the opposite side of things, the mental health crisis, the climate crisis, the meaning crisis, all this sort of meta crises that we're going through right now can be rooted to disconnection from self, disconnection from community, disconnection from the earth, disconnection from source. And so again, what we're learning through psychedelics, back to the point that I made earlier about this truth of interconnectedness,
Hmm.
when we have that classic psychedelic experience, the mystical experience where we connect to something greater, it helps us to remember where we came from and where we're going, and that the ego is only temporary.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Wow. There's a lot of kind of thoughts around that. Could you share with me some of the your personal experiences? maybe guided or unguided, what was the most like impactful for you, some of those experiences?
I like things in threes.
Okay.
So I'll just talk through three of the most impactful
Yeah.
experiences that I've had. The first one being when I first did LSD. I was 19 at the time. It was a beautiful spring day in Michigan. It was the end of my sophomore year of college, and I went to school right on Lake Michigan. And Lake Michigan is one of the most stunning areas of the entire world, I would say. Very underrated. Not a lot of people know about it, but there's beautiful cascading sand dunes all up the coast in Lake Michigan with stunning woods,
Hmm.
right? So with a few friends, we went out mid 70s, blue sky, sunny day, and did a couple hits of acid, went hiking in the woods, went down into the dunes, went swimming, and just really like had this incredible, beautiful opening experience. And it was one of those things where I remember towards the end of my experience with acid, my acid trip, I remember reflecting on like, I get it now. Like I get why this is so impactful because it really felt like a before acid and an after acid moment and experience.
Right.
And so that was my first awareness of the power of these medicines.
You've read about it quite a bit, I would imagine, or at some
I
point.
mean, at that time, I was 19. I had done mushrooms about 5 months earlier with a friend, like
Okay.
2 grams of mushrooms. It was interesting, but not like a wow, like profound.
Mm.
I had read up probably a few things, but by no means was I well versed
Right.
in it. And I wasn't at that point super deep into like Terrence McKenna or Hunter S. Thompson or Ken Kesey or any of that. Like I really had no context of the counterculture and all that.
Mhm.
But a good friend of mine in college had done acid for a few years by that point and just
Mhm.
sort of introduced me to it. So I was like, oh, this is incredible. Like I get it. And so, I mean, it was so impactful that I got a tattoo of the acid molecule on my ankle. It was the first tattoo
Oh, what age?
that I ever.
19, at that age.
No, I think it was like 27 or 28.
Okay, later.
So pretty far after.
Yeah, yeah. But that's good because that memory stayed strong like throughout the years, and that was just a confirmation that like a stamp that that actually was.
Well, and the core of it, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, was just this ego dissolution. I experienced death,
Yeah.
and not in a very like harrowing or traumatic way, but just it was like, oh, like I am not my ego. I am not my personality. I'm not my story. I'm something much more vast and expansive than that. And after I die,
Hmm.
my body, my soul, whatever, will just go back into that flow of
Yeah.
consciousness,
Right.
if you will. And that gave me then the courage to go, well, if that's the case, if there's nothing to lose, so to say, if death is an illusion anyway, why not spend the energy that I have and the time that I have to create something of something like a legacy, something beautiful, something that I can point back to as what manifested through my existence,
Mhm.
right? And so that's what really inspired me down a very unconventional path,
Yeah.
right? Which led to Third Wave. I also started a retreat center in the Netherlands called Synthesis as part of that. And then around that time, this is, my first acid experience is 2010.
Mhm.
Fast forwarding to 2018, 2019, I went on an ayahuasca journey with a few of our friends
Mhm.
down in Costa Rica, One Heart Journeys, and had an ayahuasca journey there. It was a day ceremony. So ayahuasca is most commonly used in the evening in the jungle. It's very dark. You're by yourself. You're in a loca. There's tons of mosquitoes, potentially, right? This is how it's been classically used.
Mhm.
But a friend of mine had started an experience in Costa Rica, and we had 3 ceremonies, 2 in the night and 1 during the day. And that day ceremony, I still look back on as one of the most profound, if not the most profound psychedelic experience that I've ever had. Just really coming into a greater sense of my power, my strength, the manifestation of what I was capable of, doing that within a community that I really trusted and loved and felt supported by. Again, because my core thing was feeling disconnected, was feeling isolated from that. So to have an ayahuasca experience
Mhm.
within a community, it was just totally inspiring and uplifting
Mhm.
in that way. And so that was really another beautiful experience where I felt loved and seen and understood. And then the third experience, I would say one of the most impactful and profound experiences, and it's very unique and interesting, was combining a psychedelic modality with body work. So when we think about psychedelics, we often just think about the tool itself,
Mhm.
LSD, mushrooms, ayahuasca, San Pedro, and the ceremony that comes with it.
Sure.
And one of the beautiful parts about psychedelics is they can be synergistic with other transformative modalities. So about a year and a half ago, I had the chance to try ketamine. Ketamine isn't a classic psychedelic; it's a dissociative.
Right.
But I did ketamine rectally, right? And then I did body work on the ketamine. And so what that really opened up is ketamine as a dissociative or an anesthetic. It blunts the pain response. And so much trauma that we hold and so much of the story that we hold are unconscious, and it's stored somatically, right? Physiologically.
Yep.
And so I worked with one of the world's best body workers. He's been doing body work for 50 years. He's in his early 70s now. And we did ketamine, and then I did a 2-hour session of body work, and just was totally changed after that. All this tension that I held in my jaw, in my throat, and my face was totally released. All this tension that I held in my shoulders and my arms was totally released, and it never came back.
Never came back.
It
Wow.
was just fully released from that.
Wow.
And that really woke me up to, if working with the right facilitator and if using the right medicine and combining those two things together, the way that we can let go of things, the amount that we can heal in a short period of time is incredible. And that's what I love about even psychedelics themselves, is the way that they dilate time, right? Because when we think of a healing path, when we think of any path of transformation, the mind is often constricted by, okay, this is going to take a day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years, whatever it is. And what psychedelics teach us is that time is irrelevant, right? What used to take, let's say, 10 years of talk therapy can now be done within a single session with psychedelics, right? And I love that idea that we're not constricted by time, that we can choose any path that we wish, and that by working in things like breath, psychedelics, body work, meditation, right, we can actually transcend how we think about the world and move in really incredible and beautiful ways. It's almost a bit like superhuman or supernatural.
Yeah.
But it's actually tried and tested and now being clinically proven,
Right.
with psychedelic research.
Do you think psychedelics took off more as a like public phenomenon, not just like a shaman for a particular culture? It's not like the whole culture is constantly going on the, say, we're doing any psychedelics. But for in the Western country, those waves, of popularity, are more in the Western world because we're much more conscious of like get it quicker. Like everything needs to be done on time, and the quicker the better. Type thing. Efficiency and stuff, right? Do you think that that's the main driver why it kind of took off in this culture, or like in this type of society? I don't know.
That's a great question, Kirill. I love your question. You're such a good question.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
So this idea of efficiency and, let's say, Western culture's focus on efficiency, and what's the relationship of that to the growth of interest in psychedelic medicine? It's a yes and a no, right? There's an element where I would say a lot of the for-profit sort of interests that are now starting to enter the space, when they're looking at how they set up treatment modalities, they're looking at, wow, psychedelics are very effective and they're very efficient. And I think it's important to distinguish between the two. Efficacy is not necessarily tied to efficiency. Right? These are two separate things. So when the for-profit interests are coming in, they already recognize the efficacy. They're now looking, how can we make the efficacy as efficient as possible? Now, the paradox is oftentimes efficacy and efficiency are like that. Right. So if you try to improve efficiency, you're likely going to see a drop in efficacy.
Right.
If you're purely looking for efficacy, you're going to see a drop in efficiency.
But it's not a direct correlation, right?
It's not a direct correlation,
right,
necessarily, right? I think partly what we're seeing with psychedelics is we can have both incredible efficacy and the healing modalities can be efficient.
Sure.
Right. But like, as an example, there are a lot of companies now that are saying, hey, instead of 6 hours for a trip or an experience, like with psilocybin, let's invent a new molecule where we can do it in 3 hours, right? Or instead of using psilocybin, let's use 5-MeO-DMT, which only takes 45 minutes, right? And that way we can bring in a lot more folks and make a lot more money because we're
Right.
treating a lot more people. Now, the downside to that is so much of the efficacy of psychedelics is tied to the nonlinear approach of it. In other words, we're not trying to fit you in a box and say you need to do this, this, and this. We're saying the healing process takes time.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying that community and social connection is a central element of that efficacy,
Mm-hmm.
and that you can't make community efficient,
Mm-hmm.
right? Community is about connection. Community is about holding space. Community is about presence. And if you try to weave in too much efficiency and technology into that, you're actually going to lose the very thing that you're going for.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really important that we look at what are ways that we can improve overall efficiency,
Yeah.
certainly without losing the connected human component. Because
Yeah.
we're also seeing with AI and chatbots and all these other things, like there was just this ad on Facebook the other day, which was, why do you need to talk to a real person? Just talk to an AI,
Right.
just talk to a chatbot.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe that would work, but it's like, to me, it's similar to saying, why not just eat at McDonald's every day? Why bother paying X amount for food at Whole Foods?
Right.
Or why bother cooking your own meal? Just go to McDonald's and get this. So you're filling the same hole,
Right.
but the nourishment isn't there, right? And I think we want to keep the soul level nourishment within psychedelic medicine. The focus has to be on connected community and doing it within an environment where you feel connected and supported.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just get them in, get them out, get them in, get them out. That's been the traditional medical model,
Right.
and it's failed us.
That's right.
And I think we really need to figure out what's a better approach when we're looking at working with psychedelics.
Yeah. From what I'm hearing you saying, the efficiency potentially undermine the social fabric. It could. I don't know if that's a if then type scenario.
Well, we're seeing that, right?
Yeah.
With technology undermining efficiency, undermining the social fabric. We saw that with Facebook. We're seeing that with various parts of social media.
Yeah.
You know, there was a book written in the 50s that I've gone back and reread called The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul. And it was actually the book that Aldous Huxley recommended everyone read with this emergence of technology. And he talks about in that book, what are all the downsides of a world of society that's so reliant on technology?
Yeah.
And one of the core downsides is you lose what it means to cultivate skill, cultivate presence, cultivate patience. You trade convenience for resilience and usefulness. And so I think that's just a general meta thing that a lot of people need to be mindful of as we're stepping into the metaverse. Is there could be a lot of potential upside, but you can never replace true human connection. You know, you mentioned Terence McKenna earlier. Terence wrote a phenomenal book called The Archaic Revival in the early 90s. And I think a lot of what psychedelics are reminding us of are these biological truths that are baked into our entire system, and that honoring those is central to living a really beautiful life. And so I think speaking personally, this is what psychedelics woke me up to, is that my lineage is, again, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years old. And the more that I live in line with that biological lineage in terms of sleep, exercise, diet, or movement, connection, you know, meditation, other practices,
Right.
the more healthier, nourished, resilient that I will be on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I totally understand and agree with what you're saying. The efficiency, I would say the natural world is at the 100% efficiency. It's like extremely efficient at distributing energy information in general. And I feel like the efficiency in the social setting, if it's undermining the social structures, that potentially means that there are a bunch of variables that we're not accounting for. And so what we call efficient is actually very, very inefficient in other areas that we're not, taking into the account. So it's actually overall very inefficient. But I think generally speaking, efficiency is what we need to strive for and try to incorporate to be as more aware about every other variable that could potentially play a role in like how we experience life or just, like that.
Well, maybe even a better, like, I love the idea of harmony, right? So what is the marriage between harmony and efficiency. Because what I'm hearing you say is efficiency, the way that we see it now, is much more focused on short-term incentives
Mhm.
and maximizing short-term gains. And that's often within a business context for profit,
Mhm.
right? But what happens with that is second and third order consequences are not taken into consideration, right? And so we need models that both take into account short-term, what's going to happen in the short term,
Yeah.
but efficiency also and harmony has to take into account how does this impact in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 100 years.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing a shift now. We're seeing a shift from extractive models, fossil fuels, pharmaceuticals, right? Things like that, which are about extracting energy
Mhm.
in many ways,
Mhm.
to regenerative ways of being,
Right.
right? And I think, again, regeneration is about harmony, and regenerative systems are rooted in this truth of interconnectedness, that everything is interconnected.
Mhm.
And that if we were to build new systems for business, for politics, for healthcare, for culture, right, those new systems need to be regenerative. They need
Mhm.
to be rooted in that. And there's way more efficiencies that's created as a result of that, right? Because it's a zero sum, not as it's an ecosystem where nothing leaves.
Right.
Whereas right now, a lot of the models that we have set up
Mhm.
are highly wasteful of energy, right? They are inefficient. When it comes to
Integrated, I
energy.
think is the word. Yeah.
Integrated.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So we're really looking at how can we create much more integrated systems.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think the whole notion of conscious capitalism, understanding that we are one entity, that everything is part of the same thing, and if you are causing harm over there, that's just part of your arm. That why would you cut yourself, type thing. And so incorporating the notion that we are here to get, there's no them. It's all, we're all part of the same evolutionary process. And let's up, to our capacity of our awareness, do the best we can to heal ourselves first. I mean, it's us, so we're healing ourselves by healing the earth, for example. Um, and there was something else that you're mentioning.
Well, this is the fractals of healing,
Yeah.
right? So we start with the I, and we start with the individual. We heal the trauma. We heal the stories that haven't worked for us, that have led to the construct of a personality or an ego,
Mhm.
right? So it always starts with the I, because you can only heal yourself. You can't heal other people. They have to take that responsibility and they have to make that choice
Right.
for themselves. And then as we heal ourselves, we heal different elements of ourselves. We can heal our body, we can heal our mind, we can heal the spirit, right? And as we start to move through those developmental patterns, those developmental processes of healing, then we feel like we have the capacity to go outside of ourselves, to heal community and to heal the earth,
Mhm.
right? And so that healing then fractalizes
Mhm.
and grows, and then and then essentially gets passed through the systems that we're responsible for creating.
Yep.
And so my personal mission, right, within all of this, that I haven't communicated yet. I've talked about psychedelics. I've talked about my own path, but in those early days when I was working with LSD, when I was 19 and 20,
Mhm.
I had a recognition, a visceral recognition of the challenges and problems that we were starting to face when it came to the climate crisis, right? And generally this existential crisis. And it was very clear that things are moving, and especially at that point in time, were moving in a not so great direction.
Mhm.
And so when I was reflecting on that, I was really considering what are the greatest points of leverage that we have
Yeah.
to actually shift the very systems that we live within. And so my personal mission through all this work has been, how do we inspire the leaders of tomorrow?
Yeah.
How do we inspire those who are running companies, those who are running politics, those who have positions of leadership and power and authority?
Mhm.
How can we help them to shift their consciousness, to come at things from a much more integral world, an integral perspective?
Right.
Right?
Right.
That's what psychedelics can help to do. So that's what I've often focused on. Is my focus has been less on how do we heal the masses
Yeah.
that are clinically sick with psychedelics. It's important, it's imperative, it's necessary, it's helpful.
Yeah.
This is not to say that that's the wrong way to go. It's only to say that I've focused my time and attention on how are we shifting the consciousness of those who are responsible for
Mhm.
creating the systems that we live in.
Mhm.
Because if we can shift the consciousness of, let's say, 10%
Yeah.
of those who hold that responsibility, then they will create these new systems that
Sure.
all of us live within.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a very efficient approach to solving the problem, by targeting the creators of structures of systems that because the whole world consists of those types, all kinds of organizational structures, cultural structures. An individual is usually playing just a little role, but those structures starts to have their own patterns of interaction. It's not anymore on the level of the human interaction; it's on the level of system interaction. And in order to make any change in the world, you have to figure out how to change the system that will interact with other systems. Yeah, and in fact, I really like this analogy of Terence McKenna. As you probably already by
You're a
now,
Terrence McKenna fan.
I'm such a fan,
Yeah.
man. Like I've listened to basically everything that
Yeah.
you've ever said. Um, I like his vision of evolution, and he calls it a conquest of dimensionality. Basically, we're uh, going from one dimension into the other as we're evolving. And first example is like this the most primitive cell sitting on the rock, not having no capability of even moving. So it doesn't have capability of navigating a dimension of 3D. It just stay very stationary, it not even like in a conscious way navigating 3D. And as it evolves, as it becomes, more mobile, now it has capability of like creating movements and start to navigate the 3D. And now, time to now, like now, forward time to now, or even to the point where animals basically mastered the 3D dimension. They could, run really quickly. They can jump trees. They are really good at like grasping on the 3D reality, and we're part of that trend. And as we were evolving, now we jumped into this new dimension in which cultures and language and concepts and ideas exist. So it's physical reality becomes as a platform for us or for the new dimension to start developing, and then it's kind of this. So and then humans are becoming a part of something bigger, like a family, and then the family of a community. And now we're getting to the point where we're realizing that we are part of the whole. It's not just a small little individual, small group we're part of here, but it's part of everything else. But so we basically, through the process of healing, we are basically restoring the natural paths of I don't know where I was going with it, but basically, we're creating a restoring the kind of the connection of the whole world. There are no boundaries, unhealthy boundaries that like society and put not intentionally. Obviously, we're always doing our best at every moment. It just happens to be not in aligned with the natural flow of things.
Precisely.
But what was the point? Like, why? I kind of forgot
We lost the thread.
right, right, right. So that's why I think it's important to a very efficient way to target, organization or leaders of those organizations to create any kind of impact in the world. They're much more focused. So another analogy I like to bring up. So you take a magnifying glass, and you go outside and you try to find the right place of how far away from the surface for you to create a focus. If it's not focused, there's no physical change that's been created on the surface. And then the more focused you are, it will actually create the physical manifestation of the focus point, right? And so those leaders are that focus point of the organization, right?
The point of magnification.
Yeah, exactly.
The,
It's the other way around. It's not like from here to the point. They are basically it's the other direction flow.
and it's a both and, right? So it is, my personal mission has been, how do we impact the minds, the hearts, the experience of people in leadership positions, but also like, how do you educate a populace about what I call the skill of psychedelics, right?
Hmm.
Because most people are illiterate when it comes to psychedelics at this
Hmm.
point in time, right? If we were to use cooking as a parallel metaphor, most people can't even cook an omelet when it comes to psychedelics at this
Right.
point, right? So yeah, we need to train people in leadership positions to recognize these higher levels of consciousness and how they can be used as a magnification point
Mm-hmm.
for the systems that they're creating. And what's just as important is the average everyday person, so to say, needs to have a baseline understanding of what's the difference between mushrooms and alcohol, or what's the difference between mushrooms and Coke, or what's the difference between mushrooms and, any other Prozac or any other drug, so to say, right? Because we're very, very far from actually understanding the basics of psychedelics,
Mm-hmm.
even the difference between microdosing and higher dosing. So I think educating and informing the populace around that is also it's important because these are going to be very useful tools. They're going to be medically available and soon legally available, and people need to know how to use them properly for healing and transformation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I believe one hard mission is very similar by targeting the leaders, right?
Correct.
Um, yeah, I mean, it just makes sense. It's the most efficient way of doing it. Could you share with me some of the personal experience of, if ever, encountering the other, like feeling that there is something greater than just, or there is some other intelligence potentially that could be communicating with you or with anyone else that's not just part of your mind in a way? Have you ever had an encounter of that type?
Well, with every high dose psychedelic experience, right, there's an opening to something that you can't quite fully define or comprehend.
Mhm.
People will say they get downloads or they get intuitive guiding
Yep.
or God speaks to them or aliens or entities speak to them. For me, I've had the kind of awakening, so to say, that experiences something much greater that I can't define, that's unfathomable.
Mhm.
I also feel like, a lot of people's obsession or interest in, let's say, aliens and kind of fixating on that or exploring that is also, it's an expression of that desire to be in touch with the unknown,
Yeah.
the mystery, the unfathomable, because so much of the world that we live in right now is known, it's linear, it's
Yep.
logical, it's defined. And what is core to the health of our soul is being able to explore the mysterious and the unknown and the
Right.
unfathomable, right? And psychedelics put us back into that.
Mhm.
And then a lot of, after we come out of a psychedelic experience, how do we continue to cultivate that relationship? I mean, that's what a lot of religions have tried to develop for thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
What are the rituals? What are the routines? What are the values that we create and structure our life around so that we have
Mhm.
an ability to get back in touch with this unfathomable, kind of
Mhm.
mysterious
Mhm.
concept?
Mhm.
So on a personal level, I like to look at it as intuition.
Yeah.
And when we get the mind, the personality, the ego out of the way, it allows us to tap into this incredibly wise, expansive lineage
Mhm.
of human knowledge and understanding.
Mhm.
And then a lot of the practices for integration are going and tapping back into that to
Mhm.
to just remember where it is that we can.
Mhm. Yeah, the reason why I'm asking is because I've had personally an experience um during my ayahuasca ceremony about maybe 6 years ago, and that was the last time I've done it. Um, I've never really been a hobbyist or interested too much in the topic of aliens or other beings. Like I've never really done any research. I had no. I wasn't like completely disregarding and saying, "Oh, it's a complete bullshit. It doesn't exist." I was just focusing my attention on something else, and I haven't really explored that area too much, by then at that time. And then during the ayahuasca ceremony, I've had an encounter with this light beings who had this light pattern in their heart area that was representing their kind of personality, their identity, and they were right there next to me and say, "Welcome. This is our world." And then they would show me their world, and it was all very non-physical, kind of ethereal, just energetic type environment in which they could manifest large, massive changes in their land and their environment just with their intention. They would be like, "Look." and then they would create this massive change in the environment. And they told me that, and we are here in the same, like we're right next to you, like we're in the same plane. You're basically, you can't just see us in a way. And so when I came out of it, wow, like I was completely blown away. Like I didn't know how to, like, what to make out of that, you know?
It reminds me of Rick and Morty. You watch Rick and Morty?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Rick and Morty feels very psychedelic in that they always go into these other dimensions and other worlds where all these other beings exist, and it often looks like a DMT trip.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something. I mean, you've listened to more than enough Terrence McKenna.
Yeah.
So probably when you came out of that experience, right, that's a lot of what McKenna talks about in terms of DMT and the DMT
Mm-hmm.
sort of elv space or whatever space that is,
Mm-hmm.
where we're clearly in worlds that we can't see,
Yeah.
right? And what psychedelics often do is they open us up, they open our mind, they open our brain, they open whatever those channels are to accessing these other dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've interviewed people in the past as well who are exploring the relationship between DMT and ESP, extrasensory perception,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at how can DMT help with telepathic communication? How can DMT potentially give people shaman-like powers to change the weather, right? How can DMT help with these other, what we would consider superhuman or supernatural powers?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very fascinating because what we're conditioned to believe is that if science can't prove it, it must not be true.
Right.
And what psychedelics often teach us is that science can't prove everything and that there's a lot of unprovable things that are miraculous in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, this is what, when we look at the Bible, when we look at Quran, when we look at
Mm-hmm.
the Vedantic texts, right? Miracles are spoken about again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And to perform miracles requires you to be a very sort of evolved being. It's not just that it's accessible to everyone and everyone. And what psychedelics seem to be doing is helping more and more people access these unconscious powers, so to say.
Yeah.
And what I'm really curious about, just in thread of this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
how can then psychedelics be used with intention to create and develop, let's say, superhuman capacities and capabilities for good, right? Because the other thing with psychedelics is there are a lot of weird or psychopathic or, you know, not so healed people who are using this,
Right.
who are using these tools for certain levels of power.
Right.
So psychedelics aren't necessarily inherently, you know, good tools. It just
Right.
depends on how they're used. It depends on the set and setting.
They're powerful tools. Yeah.
They are powerful, but power can be used for both good and evil.
Exactly.
Right. And so I think that's another consideration is when working with people in leadership positions, when working with people who already have a lot of power, many of them are psychopathic or they can be psychopathic. So that's up to the discernment of the facilitator
Mm-hmm.
about who do you want to give more power and energy to, and how can that be directed to help, to really, really help people? Because that is at the heart of, I think, a lot of what's going on in the psychedelic space right now is 99% of it is amazing and good and awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But unless you eliminate the shadow, the 1% of shadow, it could potentially come back in a really nasty and negative way.
Mm.
And that mirrors with any individual's path on personal development, right? We all have shadow.
Yeah.
We all have things that we need to kind of work through. And if you are an individual who is taking on more responsibility, more power, more leadership, it is imperative that you do your own personal work so that shadow doesn't interfere with the capacity to really help other people.
Yeah, I think there is no other way to move forward. We've already seen how that unconscious behavior could result in creating, you know, unsustainable ways of living our lives. We don't have a second try, like, of pursuing the, like, being the same way. Like, we really have to do something very different, drastically different, you know, while we moving forward. I'm very fascinated about the connection of spirituality and technology. It's the psychedelics, put it all into the same pot and kind of mix. I mean, I'd like to hear your perspective on where does technology lie in our in our future, like a sustainable future human? what the relationship do we have with technology, and how do we use it in a sustainable way?
When I think about technology and what comes up is it's always a tool that we want to use, but not that we want to be used by. It's a tool that is helpful, but can't necessarily be central. So even when I look at the role of computers and phones and internet and social media and soon the metaverse, it's good to be familiar with those. It's good to be able to integrate those and leverage those. And at the same kind of in the same breath, it's really important that as individuals, we develop the necessary capacity to survive and live without technology.
Mhm.
And what that means to me, again, is how do we marry this evolutionarily biological wisdom that we've evolved with for thousands and thousands of years
Yeah.
with cutting edge tools that can just help us to better navigate the current situation that we're in. And so practically,
Mhm.
one thing that I'm orienting more and more towards is how do I learn how to hunt? How do I learn how to grow my own food?
Mm.
How do I learn how to build my own shit? Right? Because many of us who have grown up in the digital age are lacking those more technical, sort of fundamental skills of human survival uh,
Mm.
and even thriving.
Mm.
So technology is fickle, it's tricky. Technology is also something that has been developing for thousands of years at this point.
Mm.
Fire could be a technology, the wheel could be a technology, the printing press, books, all of these are certain forms of technology,
Right.
right? So continue as a human to learn about these new forms of technology, to engage with them, to know about them, and create the necessary fundamental sort of foundation of those skills that we've relied on for thousands and thousands and thousands of years to survive
Mhm.
and thrive. That's how I would see the balance in terms
Mm.
of like, where we go from here with technology. We talked about the metaverse a little bit before. I feel like knowing and understanding that will be relevant, or even things like cryptocurrencies,
Mhm.
knowing and understanding that will be relevant, but I would not put too many of my own personal eggs in that basket.
Mhm.
I feel like at this point in time, we're really having to make a decision about where is it that we want to choose to spend our time and energy. Is it going to be in this sort of Ready Player One metaverse?
Yeah.
Or is it actually going to be in physical communities where we're spending time with real people doing real things?
Yeah.
And those paths are going to actually diverge more and more and more.
Mhm.
And there will be a certain subsegment of people who choose to live, let's say, a more Luddite kind of way of being. And I see and sense that I will go more that direction. And there will be some people who just choose to upload
Mhm.
themselves to the metaverse
Mhm.
and live within that sort of technological, ethereal realm.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a very soulless, empty, um, non-integrated place to go.
Mm.
I'd much rather do as I've been doing and as my species has been doing for hundreds of thousands of years
Yeah.
and pursue that path
Yeah.
because that has longevity, that's been tried and tested. All this new metaverse, social media stuff, I think is a recipe for potential disaster.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's thanks for sharing your stand on that. I think for me, um I have a pretty I mean, considering all of the kind of negative externalities that technology brings to us, I have an outlook on technology that's pretty optimistic in the sense that um it is an extension of our boundaries, of our capability as a stick is to when we're reaching for an apple. Um, Information technology just has a capability of not of healthily increase our capability of being humans. But specifically for now, it's been working on the brain part of our body. But now with all of the like robotics and things, now we're actually extending our uh, hands. Like even the car is an extension of ourselves when we're on the road. So we're building physical extensions of different parts of our body. And I don't see that trend of slowing down or or reversing back over time. Um, and I would, l- you know, just knowing that that's not slowing down, and I do support a healthy community living where everyone connects deeply to one another. I want that more of that in the world for sure. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how to use the future technology of as far as I can see, so I can predict the trajectory of it, so I can start building something that could serve the public, the humanity in a way that would funnel us back to the healthy way of living. So basically, how do we merge the two? How do we create experiences that are meaningful enough that will incentivize you to be pulled back to the healthy way of living? Same with spirituality. A lot, how do we create new experiences or use technology in the way that brings us closer to our source of the spirituality? I mean, in a way, like information, transmitting information and broadcasting knowledge that could get people a little bit closer is one way. For example, we have access to information best than ever. Like, and I feel like this is the time when this is happening, where the global level of consciousness is raising. Part of the reason is the technological evolution, that we have access to information. People can look things up, they can read it. They have access to everything. And so once you even start manually, kind of be on this frequency of healing, you will be bombarded with healing content, for example. So in that sense, it's serving us. It could definitely serve us.
It can serve us, and we can also get lost in it. It can be distracting. It
Absolutely.
can pull energy from
Yeah.
us, right? So it does require a level of mindfulness or a level of vigilance to stay on the path,
Hmm.
of presence and equanimity and patience and all that, and now get too convinced or drawn into this other world and this. I mean, we're already on it, doing it with our phones all the
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah.
And that will imagine that, but now it's going to be, you can just put a headset on, or you could just put glasses on, and you're in it as
Or
well,
contact
right? So it'll,
lenses. Yeah.
yeah, it'll become more accessible and more available. And likely what will happen again with the metaverse is it's not a totally fake world. It's augmented reality onto our physical landscape.
Hmm.
And so there is certainly a way at which we can bring those two worlds together in a way that may be sustainable and healthy.
Hmm.
But it's going to, again, a lot of this technology, because it's so brand new, it requires a lot of experimentation.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of integration. And I always defer to something called the Lindy effect, which is the longer something has been around, the more likely it is to be around.
Sure.
And so when I look at what are our values? How are we living? I'm looking at what have we as humans been doing and what's worked
Yep.
for thousands of years.
For sure.
And let's root in that, and then be mindful about the sort of technology that we're bringing in to augment
Hmm.
the sort of evolutionary roots of our existence.
Hmm. In fact, I feel like the two distinct direction of going to have less technology and living communities, and like we did thousands of years ago, and the other direction of being very technologically advanced, are happening at the same time more than ever, because we have to balance each other out. It's like a tree that needs to have roots to have a stable ground for us to grow far, right? If you trying to grow really, really far and you don't have any roots, you're gonna fall. And that's kind of what we somewhat experienced a little bit, right? And so I feel like that's a natural way of evolving. Like, we will be growing up, our trees up, only if we've created that really strong foundation, right?
Yeah, as above, so below.
Hmm.
Precise.
Um, man,
We covered a lot.
yeah, yeah. Appreciate your opening your mind up, sharing your experiences, thoughts. Let me know if there's anything that you think you would like to share else with me that would be important for additional for the content to be released and other people to experience it as well.
This is great. I mean, we caught so much. We talked about we talked a lot about the psychedelic stuff, my
Yeah.
story, technology, spirit. Like we
Hmm.
covered so much. It feels so good to be here. I would just say if
Mm,
people, if anyone who's listening to this or catching these clips, however they're catching these clips or this audio, whatever it is, so anyone who's listening and they do want to find out more information about what we're up to, just go to the thirdwave.co. We have a podcast, we have guides, we have a directory of retreats and clinics, we have training programs.
mhm,
So we've really created the third wave to be that central hub to ensure that as the movement, the psychedelic movement transitions from clinic to culture,
mhm,
that these powerful tools can be properly integrated
mhm,
into our culture. Because, we've tried this before in the 60s.
mhm,
We've been here before. We had a lot of clinical research. It was going really well, and things went sideways for various reasons.
mhm,
And what I find to be true is that the success of integrating psychedelics into our culture will be central to how we evolve and heal as a species.
mhm. Beautiful. And then maybe as a last note, share your experience of speaking like this. Like it's kind of a strange setup, you know. What was your experience like
Oh,
compared to, let's say, I mean, maybe speaking to the kid. I mean, that's I'm more interested in like what that felt like versus having a camera in front of you. You know.
so working with Kirill's unique setup that he has for recording podcasts and video, this was by far the most interesting way that I've done things. It's still very easy to connect because of the mirror system
Mhm.
that's been set up. The footage that's been captured and the quality of it is very high. And I would say out of all the ways that I've done interviews, this would probably be my number one preference because it's still easy to connect and have a great conversation. And I'm well aware that the quality of the footage afterwards will be unparalleled in terms of what I've seen in the past.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
appreciate it. I like how you know exactly what the question is about. You go to the essence of the question. Like yeah, like you basically have a predefined understanding of like different things that people might need, and you deliver those
Yeah.
packages to them. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, you need this one. Okay, here it is.
Yeah, yeah, it's part of the training,
That's
like
awesome.
when you
Yeah,
do enough of these conversations and questions,
yeah,
you get the sort of, what you say on top, this is the question, but you also understand the meta layer underneath it,
yeah, yeah.
why I'm asking this question and what are we
Sure.
looking to explore together, and nailing both of those, I feel is
Yeah.
important. It's helpful.
And so that some kind of training that you've been going through is going through exactly that process, or like it's teaching you how to structure your
Oh, I just mean generally
um
having done a lot of podcasts and public
uh,
speaking and doing my own podcast. Like I've just sort of learned this over the years in terms of,
mhm,
yeah, how to have a public conversation, so to say, that's helpful
mhm,
and useful and interesting.
mhm, mhm. Awesome. Great.